The smell of roasted turkey and sage has always been my favorite part of the holidays. For years, that smell meant home. It meant my wife, God rest her soul, standing over the stove with a flour-dusted apron, humming along to the oldies station on the radio. It meant my son, Michael, running around my feet, trying to steal a piece of bread before dinner was served. It meant a house full of laughter, warmth, and the kind of unconditional love that made you feel like you could conquer the world. But on that particular Thanksgiving, as I walked up the gravel path to my son's house, the smell that wafted from the open windows didn't bring me comfort. It brought me a cold, creeping sense of dread. I knew, deep in my gut, that I was walking into a lion's den. I just didn't know which lion would strike first. It's a strange thing being a father. You spend your whole life building a fortress for your children, teaching them right from wrong, trying to instill a sense of integrity and compassion. You hope that when they grow up and build their own lives, they will carry those lessons with them. You hope they will remember the love, not the struggles. You hope they'll remember you as the man who always stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. But sometimes, life has a way of making you feel like a stranger in your own child's world. Sometimes, the fortress you built gets renovated by people who don't care about the blueprints. That was how I felt standing outside Michael's front door. I was a relic of a past life, a ghost who had shown up to a party for the living. I smoothed down my only good jacket, the one I'd worn to my wife's funeral. It was a little frayed at the cuffs, but it was clean. I'd pressed it myself the night before, making sure there wasn't a single wrinkle. I didn't want to give anyone a reason to look down on me. Not that it would have mattered. Some people have already decided what they're going to see when they look at you, and nothing you do will ever change that. The door swung open before I could knock, and there stood Michael, my son. He looked tired. There was a tension in his shoulders I'd never seen before, a weariness that made him look older than his 32 years. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a manufactured gesture, a mask he had perfected for social occasions. "Dad," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. "You made it. Come in, come in." I stepped inside, and the smell of cooking was immediately overpowered by the scent of expensive perfume and potpourri. The house was immaculate. It was the kind of clean that felt sterile, like a showroom. White couches, glass coffee tables, abstract art on the walls that I didn't understand. It was a world away from my little apartment with its worn-out recliner and the stack of books I'd been meaning to read for the last 2 years. I felt like an elephant in a china shop. I was afraid to touch anything, afraid I might leave a smudge or break something I couldn't afford to replace. I just stood there in the entryway, clutching a bottle of cheap wine I'd brought as a peace offering. It felt incredibly inadequate compared to the spread I could see being set up in the dining room. "Let me take your coat," Michael said, but he didn't reach for it. He just stood there, waiting. I fumbled with the zipper, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. He took the coat from me, and I saw him glance at the patched elbow, a flicker of something. Embarrassment? Shame? Crossing his face before he turned to hang it in the hall closet. As he did, a voice cut through the air from the living room. It was a sharp, shrill voice, like nails on a chalkboard. "Michael, is that the old man?" Finally. I was starting to think he'd gotten lost on his way from the trailer park. My heart sank. My daughter-in-law's mother, a woman whose name I could never remember because I'd only met her once before, at the wedding. She was a tall, gaunt woman with hawkish features and a diamond ring on every finger. She was perched on the white couch like a queen on her throne, a glass of champagne in her hand. She didn't stand to greet me. She just looked at me with a sneer. I forced a smile, trying to remember my manners. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for having me." "Oh, we didn't have much choice, did we?" she said, taking a sip of her drink. Michael insisted. Something about family obligations or some nonsense. She air-quoted the words. We were perfectly happy having our own little celebration, but he felt he had to drag you into it. My daughter-in-law, Emily, appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She was a beautiful woman, blonde, perfectly manicured, and impeccably dressed. In the beginning, I had been so happy for Michael. I thought she was a catch. But over time, I'd started to see the cracks. The way she looked at him sometimes with a cold, calculating gaze. The way she corrected him in front of his friends. The way she seemed embarrassed by his background. "Mother, please," Emily said. But it wasn't a correction. It was a gentle chiding, as if her mother had done something mildly amusing, not outright cruel. "Be nice." "I'm just being honest, darling," the mother-in-law replied. "It's a free country, isn't it?" I looked around the room, hoping to see a familiar, friendly face. I was searching for my grandson, Leo. He was the only light in this place. He had my wife's eyes, warm, brown, and full of curiosity. But he wasn't there. He must have been in his room or playing in the backyard. Michael guided me into the living room, his hand hovering awkwardly over my back, as if he was afraid to actually touch me. "Dad, why don't you sit down? Dinner will be ready soon." I chose a spot on a leather ottoman away from the white couch. I didn't want to ruin the upholstery. The mother-in-law watched me sit, her eyes scanning my worn shoes. "You know, William," she said, using my first name like it was a dirty word. "Emily's father, God rest his soul, always said if you can't afford to dress for the occasion, you shouldn't come. He was a businessman, you see. He understood appearances." I felt the heat rising to my cheeks, but I refused to take the bait. "I'm a retired construction foreman, ma'am," I said quietly. "We don't get dressed up for work. Just the usual jeans and a good pair of boots. I thought I cleaned up okay for the holiday." "Bless your heart," she said, the classic Southern insult dripping with condescension. "You certainly tried your best." I looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But he was standing in the corner, staring at his phone, pretending he hadn't heard. He was physically present, but mentally he was a million miles away. He checked out the second the barbs started flying, which told me this was probably a very common occurrence. The conversation in the room was a blur after that. They talked about their trips to Europe, the new car they were buying, the expensive private school Leo was attending. I sat silently, feeling smaller and smaller with every passing moment. I was a ghost at the feast, an unwelcome specter. Emily came out and announced dinner. "Everything is ready. Let's move to the dining room." I breathed a sigh of relief. It was a chance to get away from the living room. I followed the crowd, shuffling along behind the women and their expensive perfume. The dining room was magnificent. A long mahogany table draped in a linen tablecloth, gleaming silverware, and a centerpiece that must have cost more than my monthly rent. And there, sitting at the far end, was Leo, my grandson, my little man. He was wearing a suit and tie, looking uncomfortable and out of place. When he saw me, his face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Grandpa!" he shouted, waving. "You're here." My heart swelled. "Hey, buddy," I said, finally letting a genuine smile break through the tension. "How's my favorite guy?" The mother-in-law immediately shushed him. "Leo, indoor voice, and sit up straight. Your posture is terrible." The seating arrangement was a minefield. Emily was at the head of the table, Michael at the foot, the mother-in-law on one side, and Emily's brother, a pompous-looking man with a Rolex, on the other. There were several other empty seats, and then, to my dismay, I was told to sit at the very end, as far away from everyone as possible. "You won't mind, will you, William?" Emily said sweetly. "We have such a large family, and we like to keep the center seats for the immediate family." Immediate family. I was the father of the man who owned this house, and I wasn't considered immediate family. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Of course, it's a beautiful table. I'm happy to be anywhere." I sat down and Leo was seated next to me. This made the mother-in-law visibly flinch. "Leo, honey, come sit by Nana," she cooed. "You don't want to sit all the way down there, do you?" "No, I want to sit by Grandpa," Leo said stubbornly. "Leonardo," Emily said, using his full name, which she only did when she was warning him. "Don't be difficult. Come sit with the adults." "But I want to hear Grandpa's stories," he protested. "He used to build skyscrapers. He has the best stories." The mother-in-law scoffed. He poured concrete for skyscrapers, darling. There's a difference. He didn't design them. I felt a sharp sting at that. It was true I wasn't an architect. I didn't have a fancy degree, but I was damn good at what I did. I could look at a blueprint and see a building come to life. I knew how to pour a foundation that would hold 100 stories. I knew how to keep men safe on a dangerous job site. It wasn't an easy job and it wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I guess to these people that didn't matter. We all started to eat. The food was excellent, of course. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, green beans almondine, sweet potato casserole. It was a feast, but I could barely taste it. The atmosphere was so cold and hostile that I just pushed the food around my plate, trying to survive. The mother-in-law was in her element, holding court. She talked about the country club, her charities, and how difficult it was to find good help these days. Every word was a subtle jab at the fact that I was a worker, and she was a woman of leisure. You know, she said, turning to me, I'm surprised you managed to get a seat at the table. We usually have the hired help eat in the kitchen. She laughed, a high-pitched, tinkling sound that was devoid of any real humor. I'm kidding, of course, but that is a very nice jacket. Where did you get it? A thrift store. The table went quiet. Everyone looked at me, waiting for my reaction. My hands started to shake. I placed them in my lap, under the table, hoping no one would notice. Michael finally spoke. Mom, please, he said, addressing his mother-in-law. Let's just have a nice dinner. But she wasn't done. She was like a shark that had smelled blood. I'm just making conversation, Michael. I'm curious. Why don't you tell us, William, what it's like being poor? I mean, it must be so liberating. No responsibilities. No one expecting anything from you. I felt the eyes of everyone on me. Emily was studying her nails, a faint smirk on her lips. Her brother was looking at me with obvious disdain. Even Michael couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his plate, slicing his turkey into smaller and smaller pieces. I took a deep breath. I wouldn't say liberating, ma'am, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. It's a struggle, but I'm proud of what I built. I supported my family. I put my son through college. I paid off my house. Oh, you owned a house? She said, her eyebrows shooting up in mock surprise. I assumed you lived in a cardboard box. She laughed again. Well, a house. That's adorable. My blood was boiling. I could feel the rage building in my chest. It wasn't even the insults to me that hurt the most. It was the shame I saw in Michael's eyes. It was the way he let this woman, this bully, humiliate his father in his own home. But I held it together. I told myself that it was just a few hours. I could endure a few hours for Leo. I could endure it for the chance to spend Thanksgiving with my grandson. I turned to Leo, trying to escape the nightmare. So, buddy, what do you think of the turkey? He leaned over and whispered in my ear. I like the pie better. Can I have pie for dinner? I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had all day. You know, when I was a kid, I tried to do that once. My mom told me if I ate pie for dinner, I'd turn into a pumpkin. His eyes went wide. Really? I'm kidding, buddy. But let's save some room for the good stuff. Okay? He nodded excitedly. Just then, Leo started to fidget in his seat. He was wearing a tie, and he clearly hated it. He was pulling at the knot, trying to loosen it. Mom, he whined. My tie is too tight. Grandpa, can you help me? You used to wear a tie for work, right? Emily looked up sharply. Leo, stop bothering your grandfather. And don't loosen your tie. You look very handsome like that. But it's hurting, he whined again. It's choking me. He started to cough and gasp, pretending to pass out. The mother-in-law glared at me, as if I had somehow choreographed this whole scenario. Can't you control your grandson? She hissed. We're trying to have a civilized meal. I looked at Michael. He was staring at the table. It was incredible. He was completely checked out, hiding behind a thin veneer of civility. He was a ghost, too. I can fix his tie, Mike, I said. It's no trouble. Dad, just leave it, Michael mumbled, not looking up. He's fine. I will help him, I said, standing up. I've got it. I walked around to Leo's chair. I knelt down beside him so I could see the knot. I used to get dressed up for church every Sunday, so I knew a thing or two about ties. I worked the knot, loosening it just enough to take the pressure off his neck. There you go, buddy, I whispered. Is that better? Thanks, Grandpa, he said, beaming. I started to walk back to my seat, but as I passed by the main table, near where the mother-in-law was sitting, she cleared her throat loudly. Oh, and William, she said, since you're up, why don't you clear the plates? You must be used to work, after all. It was the last straw. It was such an unnecessary, cruel comment. A comment meant to publicly humiliate me, to establish me as a servant in their home. I was done being a doormat. I stopped and turned to her. I am not going to clear the plates, I said, my voice low but firm. I am a guest in this house. My son invited me. I'm going to sit down and finish my meal. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The mother-in-law's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She wasn't used to being challenged. Oh, you want to sit? She spat, her eyes narrowing into slits. You want to play guest? She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor. Before I could react, before anyone could stop her, she walked up to me. I thought she was going to say something, but she didn't. She drew back her hand and slapped me, hard, right across my face. The sound of the slap echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side. I tasted blood in my mouth. The pain was sharp, immediate, and humiliating. I clutched my cheek, staring at the floor in shock. That is for being an ungrateful, crude old man, she hissed, looming over me. This is my daughter's house, and you come in here with your poor people's manners. Poor people belong outside, not at my table. You're nothing but a clumsy oaf, and I'm sick of pretending you're welcome here. I looked up at my son. My vision was swimming. Michael, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Are you going to let her do this? Michael's face was pale. He was gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the old Michael, the boy who would have jumped in front of a moving car to protect me. But then it was gone. He looked at his mother-in-law, then at Emily, who was shaking her head imperceptibly. He hesitated. He opened his mouth to speak, and I waited. I needed him. Dad, he said finally, his voice weak and pathetic. Just apologize. Please, just apologize to her, and we can sit down and finish dinner. My heart shattered into a million pieces. It wasn't the slap that broke me. It was my son, my own flesh and blood. He watched his father get physically assaulted in his own dining room, and he told him to apologize. Apologize, I said, my voice cracking. She hit me, Michael. She slapped me across the face. I know, he said, looking down at the floor. But you provoked her, Dad. You were being disrespectful. Just say you're sorry, and we can move on. Couldn't believe my ears. I looked at the others. Emily was staring at her napkin, a look of utter indifference on her face. Her brother was smirking, leaning back in his chair, clearly enjoying the drama. And the mother-in-law stood there, arms crossed, a triumphant glint in her eye. Well, she snapped, are you going to say you're sorry? Or do I have to call the police and have you removed from the premises for trespassing? I stood there, my world crumbling around me. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't physically confront a woman. I couldn't say the things I wanted to say in front of Leo. I was trapped. I opened my mouth to speak, to somehow salvage the situation, to try to explain that I just wanted to spend Thanksgiving with my grandson. But I didn't get the chance to finish. A small, clear voice cut through the tension like a blade. Mom! It was Leo. He had left his seat and was standing near me. In his small hand, he held his phone, his face illuminated by the screen. He had been quiet the entire time, a silent witness to the ugly scene unfolding in front of him. But now he wasn't looking at us. He was looking at his phone. Mom! He said again, his voice wavering a little. Grandma! Emily looked up, startled. Leo, honey, go back to your seat. This is adult business. But Mom, he said, his voice rising. Something happened. Leo, we'll talk about it later, Emily said, reaching for him. No, Mom, he shouted, and the room fell silent again. His voice was shaking, and his eyes were wide with panic. Listen, I recorded a video of Thanksgiving. He held up his phone, and we could all see the screen. It was a live video, a Facebook live video. The blood drained from my face. The color drained from Emily's face. The mother-in-law's smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. What are you talking about, Leo? Emily demanded, her voice rising hysterically. Turn that off. But Leo ignored her. He looked at me, his hero, his grandfather, who had just been humiliated in the most brutal way possible. Then he looked at the camera. His voice, though trembling, was steady. Grandma, he said into the phone, his eyes filled with tears. You're live. You're on the internet. Everyone can see you. A collective gasp went around the room. The mother-in-law lunged for the phone. Give me that, you little brat, she screamed. But Leo was quick. He ran to me, hiding behind my legs. The mother-in-law stopped her pursuit. Her face twisted in a mask of rage and panic. She knew. She knew that everything she had just done, every insult, every sneer, and every slap, was now streaming live to God knows who. The camera was facing the ceiling, but the audio was still clear. There was a moment of static silence. And then, the phone screen changed. It was no longer a live video. It had ended. But the damage was done. Leo had recorded the entire confrontation. He had recorded his grandmother hitting me, yelling at me, calling me poor. He had recorded his own mother doing nothing to stop it. He had recorded his father telling me to apologize for being assaulted. The room was frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the seconds of their public destruction. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with a rage she had never directed at her own mother. Leo, you didn't. Who did you send that to? Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide, then back at his mother. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then he asked the question that would echo in the silence of that cursed room. Mom, isn't it wrong to hit people? He asked it with a simplicity that was heartbreaking. He looked at his grandmother, then at his mother, then at his father. The question hung in the air, a perfect indictment of the adults in the room. Isn't it wrong to hit people? He repeated, his voice cracking. Grandma just hit Grandpa. I saw her. And nobody did anything. He was right. They had all failed the most basic test of decency. They had stood by and let a monster bully a harmless old man. And they had been caught red-handed, not by a security camera, but by a child who knew better than all of them. Michael finally looked up. The mask of pathetic compliance was gone. In its place was a look of dawning horror. He understood the implications. This wasn't just a family squabble. This was a PR nightmare. This was the end of his charmed life. Oh my God, Dad, he whispered, looking at me with tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Emily looked like she was about to be sick. The mother-in-law had her hand over her mouth, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. But I didn't care about their panic. I didn't care about their tears. All that mattered was Leo. I knelt down beside my grandson and put my hands on his shoulders. Leo, buddy, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Can I see the phone? He handed it to me, his little fingers cold against mine. I looked at the screen. The friends list on the broadcast was a sea of familiar names. I saw Emily's boss, the head of the PDA, the neighbors, and dozens of other people. But it wasn't just Facebook. As I scrolled through the notifications on the phone, I saw the video had been automatically uploaded to YouTube, shared on Twitter, and sent through a dozen WhatsApp groups. It had been viewed over 1,000 times already. 1,000 people had just watched me get slapped and humiliated by a woman who thought she was untouchable. And they had also watched my son, my own son, fail to stand up for me. I looked at Michael. He was crying now, pathetic sobs shaking his frame. Dad, please, we can fix this. We can delete it. We can say it was a joke. Please, don't let this ruin us. I stood up, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I looked at the phone one last time, and I realized something. I realized that the video, the proof of their ugliness, wasn't meant to ruin them. It was meant to save me. It was the justice I hadn't even known I was owed. The revenge wasn't something I had planned. It wasn't a calculated scheme to destroy them. It was a gift from the most innocent person in the room. A 9-year-old boy, wise beyond his years, who couldn't bear to see the man he loved get treated like garbage. I looked at the mother-in-law, who was now trembling, her bravado completely shattered. You told me that poor people belonged outside, I said, my voice low and steady. You were right. I do not belong here. I never did. But you know what? Watching your reputation crumble from the outside is going to be the most beautiful view in the world. I handed the phone back to Leo. Buddy, I said, this is the best Thanksgiving present I could ever have asked for. You have a good heart. You are the only person in this family who deserves a seat at the table. I turned to leave. Michael reached out and grabbed my arm. Dad, please, don't go. We can talk about this. I can make this right. Make it right, I said, pulling my arm away from him. You let her hit me, Michael. You told me to apologize to her. You are my son, and you treated me like I was nothing. There is no making this right. You made your choice tonight. You chose the status quo. You chose comfort over your own father. I looked at Emily. And you. I welcomed you into my family, and you treated me like a disease. I will never forget this, and the world won't either. You wanted to be the queen of your little kingdom. Now you're just the laughingstock of the internet. I walked out of the dining room, through the sterile living room, and to the front door. I put on my worn-out jacket, the one I had been so ashamed of just a few hours earlier. Now it felt like a badge of honor. It reminded me of who I was. It reminded me that I had survived the worst night of my life, and I had come out on top. As I walked down the gravel path, away from the house, the sound of angry shouting and panicked crying erupted from inside. The perfect Thanksgiving dinner was over. The facade had crumbled. In the coming days, the video went viral. A wealthy socialite slapping her son-in-law's elderly father was exactly the kind of clickbait the internet craved. It was picked up by local news, then national news. The mother-in-law was forced to resign from her charity positions. Emily lost her job when her boss, who had seen the video, realized she had the moral compass of a rattlesnake. The company didn't want to be associated with such an ugly display of elitism. The public had chosen a side. They had chosen me. Michael called me 100 times, begging for my forgiveness, begging for me to make a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding. He was worried about his business, his reputation, his house. He didn't apologize for his actions. He apologized because he got caught. I never answered his calls. I never returned his texts. I knew that if I spoke to him, the pain would come flooding back. But I also knew that a man doesn't have to accept an apology that isn't real. He doesn't have to forgive a son who watched him fall and walked away. Months later, I got a letter. It was from Leo. In it, he included a drawing of the two of us, sitting on a park bench, eating ice cream. He said he missed me. He said he was sorry for what happened. He said he was grounded from his phone for a year, but he didn't care. He said he would do it again in a heartbeat. He was the only one who understood what had happened that night. The slap didn't hurt as much as the silence. But in the end, it wasn't the slap that defined me. It was the voice of my grandson, the innocence standing up to cruelty, that healed me. He gave me back my dignity. And sometimes that's all a father can ask for. Sometimes the only justice you need is the truth, shared by the smallest voice in the room.